Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. With all of them, the blue light faded as soon as I touched them. I gathered up all 5 and took one last look around before heading back to the house. When I entered the bedroom where I had left the woman, she was awake. However, she looked considerably weaker, and the towels I had placed on her showed a considerable amount of blood. I showed her the 5 objects I had found. "This is what I found, but I think I should take you to the hospital," I said. "Nay," she said with a weak but panicked voice. Then she pointed to the object about the size of a golf ball. I handed it to her. She twisted it a few times, and it flashed green once. When the ball went dark, my mysterious guest put it to her mouth and swallowed the liquid that had started oozing from a small opening. After a few minutes, her wounds stopped bleeding. Then she smeared some of the yellow fluid on her injuries directly, and they seemed to close slightly. In 5 minutes, she appeared much revived, and even the lump on her forehead had gone down considerably. I wasn't sure what I should do, but at least the bleeding had stopped. "Much thanks," she said as she bowed slightly to me from her sitting position. Then the woman said wearily, "Must rest." I nodded and repositioned the blankets to settle her into the bed. She smiled at me and fell asleep immediately. I closed the door and slept on the couch that night in case she needed anything. Despite the few hours of sleep, I was up at 5. I poked my head in the bedroom, and my mysterious guest was still asleep. I left her there and started my day. A half hour later, I got a call from you, Jake. A leak in the roof of the house you and your wife were renting had flooded the living room and one bedroom. I told you not to bother coming in and to take care of the damage. I asked if you needed any help, but you didn't, so I went about my usual chores. I popped back to the house every hour or so just to check on her, and she was still sound asleep. However, when I returned to make myself some lunch, I found my mystery guest sitting in the den, flicking through the television stations. She wasn't wearing her jumpsuit anymore. She had found one of the dresses Ashley had left behind. They both were about the same size, and I had to admit my surprise guest looked pretty good in the outfit. She wasn't nearly as beautiful as Ashley, but still very easy on the eyes. Her hair that appeared to be silver last night was merely blonde today. The strange bronze color of her skin last night was now just a deep tan. However, then the most surprising thing happened. My guest turned with a start as soon as she became aware of my presence, and she smiled. "You're looking much better today," I said, returning the smile, believing that my words wouldn't mean anything to her. "Yes, I am," she responded. "Thank you for taking such good care of me last night. I was banged up pretty good." "You can speak," I said with shock. "Last night you could barely say a few words, and I wasn't sure how much you understood." "I think that was caused by the blow to my head," she said, gently touching her forehead. "I was pretty out of it." "My name is Mike Stanton," I introduced myself and extended my hand. "I'm Leandra Forth," she responded, reaching out to me tentatively. Her hand was warm, but there was a small charge of electricity that passed between us. Leandra must have felt it because she withdrew her hand quickly, but her smile widened. "Sorry," I apologized. "That must have been static electricity." "Look, I was about to make myself some lunch," I said as I motioned toward the kitchen. "Can I make you something to eat?" She smiled and nodded. I have to admit that her presence lifted my spirits. For the first time in a year and a half, I didn't realize how much I missed having female companionship, even if it was only for today. "So what happened to you?" I finally asked as we sat at the kitchen table, eating our sandwiches and fruit. "I was driving to New York when I must have hit a puddle of water on the road," Leandra explained slowly. "I lost control and my car rolled over several times, but I was able to get myself out. I crawled away, and then my car exploded. I don't imagine there is much left of it." "No, it's just a burnout shell now," I confirmed. "What was it with all those blue things?" I asked. "You seemed almost panicked about them." You were most insistent that I go and find them, and you didn't want me to call a doctor or an ambulance or anything. Then you healed yourself. How did you do that? I am sorry, Leandra apologized. I wasn't thinking clearly last night. It was very kind of you to go looking for my things. There's nothing really very special about them. It's just that they were given to me by my supervisor. They were made especially for me. As for healing myself, all I did was take an antibiotic and put some of it on my cuts. As you can see, the wounds have just scabbed over. Leandra held her arm out, and I could see several scabbed over wounds. Then she pushed out one of her legs, and I saw the same scabbing. Last night those wounds looked much worse than they did now in the light of day, but then again, I'd had quite a bit to drink. I wasn't injured all that seriously, she continued to explain. It looked worse than it was. I was very fortunate. I think the blow to my head was the most serious injury. When we finished eating, I'll show you what I made you go out in the storm to get. I'm really sorry because they aren't anything that special. The first object my guest showed me was the GPS that I had used the previous night. You already know about this one, she said with a grin. I always forget where I park my car, and with this, I never have to worry about finding it. The dictionary-sized blue object turned out to be a box of cosmetics, or that's what it looked like to me. The blue item that was the size of a small paperback turned out to be a smartphone. The baseball was a container for small candies. Leandra offered me some, and I took one. I couldn't quite place the taste, but it was sweet and delicious. It must have been full of sugar because I suddenly felt a surge of energy. Leandra explained more about the particular medicine she had taken the night before. Apparently, it was new and had been developed by the company she worked for. The medication was currently in clinical trials, and Leandra was the senior chemist on the team that had created it. The ball with the medicine, she explained, was a new delivery system. Inside the ball was coiled tubing, and when activated, it would force the liquid out. I offered to have what was left of her car towed away, but she said that her insurance company would want to examine it first. Leandra explained that she had already called them, and they promised to send someone down. If you can recommend a good hotel or motel, Leandra said as she sat down wearily, I'll leave you in peace. Aside from the fact that I enjoyed having the company, Leandra still looked quite weak, so I offered to let her stay. Look, you don't seem to be 100%, I said cautiously. You're more than welcome to stay here for however long it takes to get your strength back. You'd have your own room and your own bathroom. It would be no trouble because I'm mostly out working, so you'd have the house to yourself. That would be a terrible imposition, she protested. I can rest in a hotel until I'm well enough to head on to New York, but I would like to take you to dinner as a thank you, and perhaps you could spare some time to show me around the area. Nonsense, I waved my hand and smiled. I won't hear of it. Until you're well enough to go out, you'll stay here. I'm not a bad cook. Besides, it will be nice to have the company. Leandra smiled at me and agreed to stay. I have to admit that I was less consumed with my loneliness and hatred. It only took less than a day before Leandra seemed to sense my deep unhappiness. Of course, it would have been obvious to anyone how lonely and filled with hate I was. Little by little, she was able to coax the story from me. I ended by telling her that despite everything Ashley had put me through, I still loved her and would take her back in a heartbeat. Leandra had a curious expression on her face when I finished. She seemed to be studying me. The emotion of love, Leandra said with a sigh, it's 96% chemical. It's a chemical reaction that is triggered mostly in the brain but also through the rest of the body. If you can create the correct chemical balance in the person you desire, you can make them fall in love with you. I must have been looking at Leandra like she had two heads because she blushed. That's just the theory I have, she said quickly. I've been studying the idea at work and believe it has great potential. But to say that love is 96% chemical, I questioned. She blushed a more vibrant red. I was perhaps putting too much emphasis on my preliminary data. I've worked on this theory for some time. Well, if you can ever discover a way to do that, I laughed, you'll make a fortune. The next several days were lovely. I was going to miss Leandra when she left. I knew that I'd go back to obsessing about Ashley and hating both her and Tuck. I also knew that there was nothing I could do about it. Still, I continued to try to come up with some way to get revenge on both of them. 2 days before Leandra was supposed to leave, I had a Cattlemen's Association board meeting in town. I told her that I'd be back about 5 that afternoon, and if she liked, I'd take her out to dinner. It would be a sort of farewell dinner. I explained that I wouldn't be able to do it the night before she left because I had to prepare the payroll and meet with the accountants. She seemed sad when I mentioned her leaving. At the time, I thought I'd just imagined it. On the way to town, I got a call to tell me that the air conditioning was broken at the association offices, and they had decided to reschedule the meeting. So, I turned around and headed back to the ranch. When I arrived back, I went into the house to get changed into my work clothes, but I heard a strange noise coming from somewhere in the house. It was a low humming sound. I traced the noise to Leandra's room, and her door was ajar. Without thinking, I pushed it open and was stunned by what I saw. Leandra's appearance had altered dramatically and was continuing to change. She was holding up the blue object that I had taken to be a cell phone. A pale green light was emanating from the device, and Leandra was running it up and down her body. As I stood and watched, her appearance shifted. Gone was the blonde hair, replaced by a soft silver color. Leandra's skin had taken on the bronze tone that I had witnessed the night of the accident. Stranger still, her ears were pointed at the top. A thought thundered through my mind. This woman was definitely not from anywhere in this world. Sensing me, Leandra turned slowly and smiled at me. Her body seemed to tremble as she approached. Softly, Leandra stroked my cheek and then kissed me full on the lips. The electricity that I'd felt the first time I touched her was much more intense now and very pleasurable. I kissed her back with a passion that I thought was long gone. I don't know how it was possible, but we made love 5 times. We lay there in each other's arms, both of us quiet for many minutes, content in the afterglow. Finally, I pushed up on my elbow and stared into Leandra's eyes. "Where are you from?" I asked. She laughed. "A long way from here, about 72 light years approximately. My world is called Tia." "And why did you come here?" I was filled with hundreds of questions. "I'm not supposed to tell you," Leandra said quietly, "but I need for you to trust me more than anything." I nodded. "My world is 72 light years away. I came here through a dimensional port. We're able to open up small holes into other dimensions, which allows us to travel great distances in short amounts of time. It took about 15 minutes of your time to get here. I'm here on a mission. The people of my world are dying out." "Dying out? What do you mean?" "Your people are dying out?" I asked, both curious and alarmed. Leandra looked at me sadly and shook her head. "Inside, our population is dwindling because of our arrogance. As you have seen, we are much more advanced technologically than the peoples of this world. Still, we are ruled by the same passions: envy, lust, hatred, greed, all of them. We have weapons so powerful that we could destroy whole solar systems. To survive, we decided to edit out these base emotions. We created societies filled with love and creativity, and we thought we had succeeded. But we miscalculated horribly." Leandra grew silent, and tears began to stream down her face. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed. "We were so arrogant." "What happened?" I asked, stroking her hair. "When I told you that love was 96% due to chemicals in your body, it wasn't a theory. We had proved it. Actually, it's 96.8%. We developed a device that allowed us to analyze this compatibility, which allowed us to arrange the most suitable matches. It was impossible to find a match for everyone. To overcome this obstacle, we developed a new device that can analyze and, if necessary, change the chemical composition of an individual. Of course, there are limitations. For instance, we learned that you can only modify the chemical mixture within a person once. We also discovered there were side effects if you tried to make the compatibility 90%. Leandra paused for a moment, trying to gauge my reaction. I was filled with equal parts wonder and skepticism. Apparently satisfied with whatever she found, Leandra continued. If both individuals have at least a 60% match, true love can exist. A higher match just makes the love bond that much stronger. So we have the love question more or less solved. Using the same principles, we developed a chemical that was supposed to greatly reduce the baser emotions, and it seemed to work, at least in the clinical trials. But when we filled the atmosphere with the chemical, it produced an unexpected consequence. In less than a year, almost all of the males of my world became sterile. This caused chaos and catastrophic wars as nations tried to gain possession of the few remaining fertile males. Over the last 200 of your years, my planet, once home to 6 billion souls, now has barely 100,000. That still doesn't answer why you're here, I said, confused and horrified by what Leandra's world had experienced. We have been searching the universe seeking species that share our DNA structure. Then we search for fertile males that we can mate with. We have found that the people of this planet share our DNA, but only a few of the males are compatible. About 1 in a million can impregnate one of our females. I was not scheduled for this particular mission, but one of the women took sick, and I was a last-minute replacement. However, as I was heading to New York, my pod was struck by lightning, and I crash-landed here. Still, it was a most fortuitous accident. I not only discovered someone who could impregnate me, but someone whose chemical composition is such that I have fallen deeply in love with them. I was dumbfounded by this last comment. Are you talking about me? I asked. She nodded and kissed me. Leandra told me that I had already placed a child with her and that it would be a male. She mentioned that while we had only been together once for that purpose, the subsequent times were simply for pleasure and because she loved me. I sat up against the headboard with Leandra's head resting on my chest. I asked her, that first night, you couldn't speak our language, could you? Leandra chuckled and shook her head. No. As a last-minute replacement, there wasn't time enough to learn it. Fortunately, as part of my equipment, I have a universal translator. That first morning when you found me watching your television, I was using the translator to learn your language. I also learned Spanish. So what happens now? I asked with a hint of concern, trying to make light of it. Are you going to spirit me away to your world? No, she said, looking up at me seriously. Our laws forbid us from abducting anyone. However, you may accompany me back to my home world. If you came, you would be much revered and have someone who loves you dearly. The thought was appealing, but finally, I declined. My son isn't ready to take over running the ranch yet. Plus, I am still hopelessly in love with Ashley. Because of that alone, eventually, you would not be happy with me. In my mind, I know that I'm never going to get my ex-wife back, but my heart refuses to accept that. As twisted as it sounds, I want to get revenge against her and her husband. Tears slid down Leandra's cheeks, and she sighed sadly. I suspected that you would not wish to go with me. Even if I'm not going, can't you stay a little while longer? I asked hopefully. She shook her head. My time is short. In fact, I would not have stayed here this long if I had not discovered our compatibility. When I scanned your chemical composition, I found that you are 89% compatible with me. On the other hand, I am 98% compatible with you. It's most unusual when one's compatibility exceeds 90%. That's why I love you so much. Leandra reached up and kissed me, then snuggled back down on my chest. I still don't understand why you can't stay longer, I almost pleaded. I have to return to my world tomorrow before our dimensional hole closes. These holes can only be opened infrequently and close after only a week. If I don't return tomorrow, I'll be trapped here for 6 months until the next hole can be opened. However, I cannot disguise myself that long. But your pod was destroyed, I said. I have a spare, she said, pointing to the dictionary-sized blue box. After everything I'd seen and heard, I didn't question how the blue box would become her transportation home. Then she surprised me with a request. But before I go, do you think I could meet this woman who is keeping you from me? My initial gut reaction was to say no, and I wish I had gone with that. But I finally agreed. I thought that seeing Ashley and Tuck with Leandra on my arm might somehow make it bearable, maybe even make Ashley jealous. Ashley and Tuck would be at the quarterly country club dance. Ashley was on the entertainment committee and lived for events like this. She would have a chance to show off her latest gown, flirt with the men, and still have her husband there who adored her. She could have her cake and eat it too. Once I decided that we would attend the dance, I couldn't have Leandra show up in one of Ashley's discarded dresses. Fortunately, I had bought Ashley a new designer dress for her birthday just before everything blew apart. It was still sitting in the closet covered by its plastic cover. The new dress fit Leandra quite well, and I wore one of only 2 suits that I owned. When we entered the club, the people there were surprised to see me, and even more so to see a beautiful woman on my arm. I was pleased that most of those in attendance were genuinely glad that I was there. I spotted Ashley almost immediately. She was surrounded by several young men with Tuck right at her side. I used to hate it when Ashley did that, but apparently, Tuck didn't. He seemed to have an attitude, you can look but don't touch, she's all mine. Leandra pulled what looked like a lipstick from the purse I'd given her and almost dragged me over to where Ashley and Tuck were standing. Ashley looked up in surprise when she saw me and her eyes widened when she saw Leandra on my arm. Then her eyes narrowed as she took in the designer gown that Leandra was wearing. Ashley had never seen the dress and was unaware that I had purchased it. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Ashley said sarcastically. Tuck chuckled, and Ashley continued, what do we owe the honor of your presence here tonight? If I remember correctly, Mike, you hate these events. Finally got up the guts to face us? Tuck asked with a smirk. Your ex-wife really looks stunning tonight, doesn't she? Tuck couldn't pass up an opportunity to make things awkward. Leandra looked up at me and squeezed my arm as a signal to stay calm. No, not guts, Tuck, just stomach, I said with a smile. Besides, Leandra wanted to have dinner out with a little dancing. I paused and smiled at first Tuck and then Ashley. Oh, excuse me, where are my manners? Leandra, this, as you already know, is my ex-wife Ashley, and this is her new husband Tuck. Ashley, Tuck, this is Leandra. It's a pleasure, Leandra said as she shook hands with both. That's a beautiful dress you're wearing, Ashley said after an awkward silence. Oh, thank you, Leandra said with a giggle. In truth, I had nothing really to wear. I'm on a business trip, and visiting Mike was a last-minute decision. He gave me this dress. Don't you think that was really sweet of him? What business are you in? One of the other men asked as he eyed Leandra up and down. I'm a senior chemist for Sable Enterprises, Leandra answered smoothly. My team has been working on several new medicines, and we're close to the release of a revolutionary new drug. For obvious reasons, I can't tell you any more about it, but the purpose of my trip to New York is to decide on the release date. I watched Ashley's expression, which clearly showed she felt upstaged. I felt a surge of malicious pleasure. Ashley just nodded and turned her attention back to me with a smile. So Mike, why have you been hiding at the ranch? It's been a year and a half. Surely you couldn't still be pining over the end of our marriage. I thought you would finally understand that Tuck had always been my true love. I thought your reactions were childish because you refused to accept the situation. Our children are now divided. I know you've turned my son against me, but at least Tanya is mine. Ashley paused, smiling up at Tuck. I would have thought that you would be happy that I found true love. Leandra could feel me tense and squeezed my arm again. She then looked at Tuck and then me before turning back to Ashley. I'm sorry, I don't get it, Ashley said with a feigned innocent confusion. Why you would give up Mike for anyone else absolutely baffles me. But I guess if you're genuinely in love, trading down is acceptable. Before anyone had a chance to respond, Leandra grabbed my hand. "Mike, you promised we were going to dance." "It was nice to meet you both." The orchestra had just started playing, and Leandra and I strode onto the dance floor. I'm only an SOSO dancer, but Leandra proved to be an excellent one. "That was masterful," I said as I kissed her on the cheek. Leandra, in turn, pulled me in tight. We stayed for about an hour, long enough to get something to eat and have a few more dances. From time to time, I caught Tuck or Ashley staring daggers at Leandra and me. When we got home that night, I wanted to take Leandra to bed immediately. However, she insisted we have a cup of coffee. Leandra said there was something she wanted to discuss with me at the kitchen table. Leandra put her lipstick in the center of the table. She twisted it slightly, revealing a small screen. "I hope you don't take offense," she said, "but your ex-wife is spiteful. She cheated and then had the audacity to blame the fallout entirely on you. Her husband is emotionally immature and insecure. Trust me, nothing you can say could be any worse than what I have thought and said myself for the last 18 months. I offered a sad smile. "Now, I want you to pay close attention," Leandra said as she picked up the lipstick-shaped item. "I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to show you how you can get the revenge you want against your ex-wife and her new husband." I put my coffee cup down and leaned forward. Leandra definitely had my undivided attention. "I told you about being able to determine compatibility and change it. This is the device that does both those things. By merely contacting the skin of another, it will record and analyze their chemical composition. Also, by contacting that person's skin while activating the device, you can change their chemical composition." "How does it work?" I asked, now terribly excited. Leandra smiled at me. "Since you have decided to remain underworld, I'm going to show you how to make your ex-wife fall madly in love with you. Once that happens, I'm sure she'll leave her current husband and return to you." "Okay, I'm all in," I said with enthusiasm. "Explain to me how it works." Leandra looked at me with a devious smile. "First, a few basics. You already know that I'm 98% compatible with you and love you so much that it almost hurts. It is especially painful knowing that I have to leave you behind. Still, I will have your child to love, and that will have to be enough. Are you sure that you won't come with me?" I looked into her beautiful blue eyes, filled with hope. Because of my selfishness, I can't say that I was even tempted. I cared about Leandra but was still desperately in love with Ashley. If I could have her back as my wife, that's all that mattered to me. To win her back from Tuck would be the icing on the cake. It was just too appealing to pass up. I was completely selfish, and I never anticipated the consequences for Tuck, Ashley, or myself. "Leandra, I wish I could love you as you love me," I said. "Perhaps you should alter the chemicals in me to make me love you more." "I had hoped to do that," Leandra said, sadness evident in her eyes. "But your compatibility with Ashley is at 96%. Tuck's compatibility is almost 100%. I've never seen anything that high before. In fact, when I saw my compatibility with you at 98%, I was shocked. I've only heard of that happening once before. So, I have to increase my compatibility to match Tuck's?" I asked, not sure I understood the process. "No, you don't need to change anything about yourself," Leandra said firmly. "You need to change Ashley's percentage concerning you." The confusion must have been clear on my face because Leandra laughed. "What I found surprising is that Ashley's chemical makeup only favors you by 66%, and surprisingly, it's only favorable to Tuck by 75%. As you already know, 60% is the threshold for love. If you increase Ashley's chemical compatibility with you to 89%, you will win her back easily. After a year and a half, my days of depression would soon be over." The thought of having Ashley back was exhilarating. I think Leandra saw my excitement and frowned. All I could do was blush. "I have a few warnings to explain," she said tightly. "Okay, I'm all ears," I said, unable to hide my smile. It was unfair to Leandra, but I wasn't thinking clearly. All I wanted was to have Ashley back and, at the same time, get back at Tuck. I understand your excitement, she said with a sigh. However, there are two things you must know. First, exceeding the 89% level is not advised. There are potential side effects, nothing horrible, but why risk them when 89% would leave Tuck in the position of being only her second love? Going higher would make Ashley even more bound to you, but why risk it? I nodded and then asked, what else should I know? I'm setting this device to dissolve 1 week after I leave. After that time, it will be gone. If you have not used it by then, you will lose your opportunity to make your ex-wife love you. Okay, so how do I use it? It's very straightforward, Leandra said, holding the device which looked like lipstick. See this groove? Turn it to the left, and the screen will present itself. You increase or decrease the chemical composition by turning the top right to increase, left to decrease. We could decrease Tuck's chemical composition, but that doesn't necessarily help you. If we did that, Ashley might decide she wants neither of you, especially if she finds someone more compatible. I understand, but how do I use it? Once you've set it at 89%, all you have to do is contact Ashley's skin and push this button on the bottom. The chemical change will happen over 2 or 3 weeks. After that, every time you're with her, she will fall further in love with you. She won't be able to help herself. I took the device that Leandra offered me and kissed her softly. She kissed me hard, and we made our way to the bedroom. We made love until the early hours of the morning. Sometime before dawn, I woke up to find Leandra already dressed. She was wearing a jumpsuit similar to the one that had been destroyed. Apparently, she had a spare. I quickly dressed and drove her to a remote part of the ranch. Leandra took the blue box and set it on the ground. Next, she took out what I had initially thought to be a cell phone and began tapping something into it. Are you sure that you won't come with me? I can make the pod big enough for both of us. I know this isn't fair, Leandra, I said as I took her into my arms. I wish I had met you first. If I could, I would reduce your chemical attraction to Ashley. Leandra said wistfully. The idea of not getting Ashley back suddenly filled me with fear. You could do that. Leandra shook her head slowly, tears filling her eyes. Not without your consent. Increasing the compatibility is never a problem, but reducing it once it is in the 90% range without you agreeing to the change would be perilous. Doing that could possibly kill you. I would rather Ashley have you than see you dead. Leandra looked at me with deep sadness and asked, would you be willing to allow me to reduce your attraction to Ashley? No, I shook my head. I think this is for the best. Will I ever see you again? I finally asked as Leandra was checking on her pod. I'll be back to this world in 6 months, she said softly. If you like, I can visit. It won't be dangerous for me to travel while I'm pregnant. Gestation for my people is 5 months, not 9. I'll most definitely be sent back to this world. I kissed Leandra passionately and thanked her for giving me my life back. Her pod didn't seem to have any means of propulsion, but it rose straight up and, in seconds, disappeared in a flash. The next day, I knew there would be a meeting of the entertainment board at the club, and in all likelihood, Ashley would be there. When I entered the conference room, I found Ashley and 7 other ladies seated around a table. Silence filled the air. I ignored the awkwardness and went from one lady to the next, shaking hands with all of them. When I reached Ashley, I offered my right hand while I kept my left forefinger on the button. As soon as she grasped it, I pushed it. There was a tingle of electricity that caused Ashley to jerk her hand away. As I had done with Leandra, I apologized. Sorry, that must have been static electricity. Despite Leandra's warning, I had adjusted the compatibility to 98%. I didn't want Ashley to even give Tuck a moment's thought. What can I do for you, Mike? She said in an annoyed tone. We're kind of busy here. Well, I've come to join the entertainment committee, I said with a smile. I don't think so, Ashley said flatly. I'm not interested in this attempt to get back with me. I love Tuck. Can't you finally get that through your thick skull? The other ladies gasped in shock at Ashley's harsh words, but Ashley wasn't backing down. I just chuckled at her comment. Ashley, please, let's put our past behind us. I believe that you're planning the 4th of July celebration, and I thought a man's perspective might be helpful. I've heard some men grumble that the whole day's events are set up with only the children and women in mind. I thought I could share some ideas that might be of interest to the men. Barbara Harris, who sat across the table from Ashley, spoke up immediately. He's right, Ashley. My husband complains about the 4th of July celebration all the time. He says there's nothing to do but eat. For obvious reasons, we've limited the amount of alcohol consumed during the day. We've also turned off the internet access, so there is no television and limited cell phone service. It would be refreshing to have a man's view. The other women quickly agreed, and much to Ashley's chagrin, I was installed on the entertainment committee. I didn't know what to expect, but Ashley was hostile during that first committee meeting, and every time I ran into her or her and Tuck over the next 3.5 weeks. I was starting to think that something had gone wrong and it wasn't going to work. I was about to give up and return to my old way of living. Still, I had forced my way onto the entertainment committee, and I felt honor-bound to see it through. At the next committee meeting, I realized things were finally changing between Ashley and me. Being on the committee was surprising. I was actually coming up with some good ideas that I was sure the men would love. One was a family softball game, another was a couple scavenger hunt with the prize being tickets to a baseball game and dinner out. Throughout the meeting, Ashley hadn't been staring at me with scorn. In fact, she smiled at me several times. At the end of the committee meeting, Ashley stopped me at the door and asked if I'd like to have lunch with her. Her excuse was that she wanted to talk about the 4th of July celebration. I readily agreed. After that, we started having lunch once or twice a week again, ostensibly to further discuss the 4th of July party. Each time we met, Ashley found various reasons to touch me or get closer to me. During the 4th of July celebration at the club, things really heated up. I had been running around taking care of my responsibilities when Ashley grabbed my arm and asked if I'd help her get more soft drinks out of the storage shed. After I followed Ashley into the shed, she locked the door behind us. Ashley slid in front of me and kissed me with a passion I had never experienced from her before. I was immediately aroused and kissed her back. It felt incredible to be with her again. At this point, I began an affair with Ashley. We started meeting in various motels several counties away. At first, I was nervous, knowing I wasn't as well endowed as Tuck. However, I didn't need to worry. That first time, Ashley had several culminations to my one. As time went on, I wasn't as thrilled with the affair as I thought I would be. Despite our attempts to be discreet, rumors started to float around town. If questioned about it, I would roll my eyes and tell whomever to get real. It all came to a head about 2 months after the affair started. Ashley and I had just finished a round of intimacy, which was excellent. However, I was coming to the realization that I wasn't as deeply in love with Ashley as I had been. As Leandra had predicted, Ashley had fallen hopelessly in love with me. "Mike, can I ask you something?" Ashley asked while we were lying in bed. "Of course," I answered. "Mike, I made a terrible mistake," she said with tears in her eyes. "I never should have left you. I now realize how much I love you. I miss you terribly. Can I come home?" I looked into Ashley's eyes and saw the fear of rejection. 3.5 months ago, I would have been over the moon at such a prospect. While I still wanted her home again, it wasn't as big a deal as I thought it would be. "I'd love to have you back," I said, and then pointed out the obvious issue. "But you're a married woman. I think Tuck might object." "I've already decided that I'm going to divorce him," she said matter-of-factly. That comment left me cold. It was so typical of Ashley. It was all about what she wanted. Tuck may be many things, but he wasn't a fool. The rumors about Ashley and me apparently got back to him. He hired a private investigator, and somehow a camera had been installed in our motel room. I don't know how they got the pictures and video because we changed motels almost every time. The confrontation between Tuck and Ashley went very badly. The next time I saw Ashley, she had a black eye. I was incensed that he had hit her. Despite the cheating that Ashley and Tuck had done, I never struck her. I was raised to believe you just don't hit a woman. You pretty much know what happened next. The divorce between Tuck and Ashley got very ugly. Tuck fought it every step of the way. As the divorce wound its way through the courts, Ashley moved back to the ranch. You were decidedly unhappy with me when I allowed your ex-mother, as you still called her, back into the family home. I was somewhat surprised that most of my friends took Tuck's side in this matter. When Ashley left me, they were all on my side, but now that Ashley was back, they were mad at me. The thing that really irked me was that Tuck had been the bad guy the first time, and now I was the bad guy. But no one seemed to want to put the blame where I thought it should go. I guess all those years of Ashley working her charms had insulated her. Having Ashley back was great for the first month or so, but Ashley being Ashley, she thought things would go back to the way they were when we were first married. But I had changed. I don't even remember what started the argument, but it escalated until Ashley packed a bag and left. Strangely, I didn't care. I didn't try to call her or contact her in any way. I can't explain it. I was just done. I came to believe what people said: time heals a broken heart. The day after Ashley left, Tuck cornered me in the feed store. I could tell he was spoiling for a fight, but I didn't want any part of it. "I'm going to kick your butt," he growled at me, and I believed he was going to try. "I don't want to fight you, Tuck, because there is no reason," I told him. "Ashley left me yesterday." His hands, which had come up in preparation, suddenly dropped to his side. He looked at me suspiciously. "You're just trying to get out of a beating." "Look, Tuck," I said with a sigh. "You and I both know I can go toe-to-toe with you, but what's the point? Ashley packed a bag and left last night. If you want her back, I think now would be the time to find her." He continued to stare at me, trying to decide if I was telling the truth or not. Finally, he left to find out for himself. I guess he figured if I had lied to him, he'd find me another day and try to kick my butt. With Ashley gone, I had time to reflect on what I had done, and I was deeply ashamed. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever think I would have an affair with a married woman. Even though Tuck had been cruel about my pain, I found no joy in witnessing his suffering. As bad as the situation was, it got worse. Tuck found Ashley at her parents' house and tried to convince her to come home with him. She made it clear that she loved me, not him. Ashley told him she was going to go ahead with the divorce. It was a crushing blow for Tuck. When Tuck pointed out that she had left me, Ashley told him it was just a minor disagreement and we'd be back together in a day or so. At this point, you know the rest of the story. I didn't take Ashley back, but she kept up a steady stream of phone calls, emails, and ambush meetings. Meanwhile, Ashley kept rejecting Tuck. Finally, in total despair, Tuck committed suicide. Shortly after that, I think because I wouldn't take her back, Ashley had a nervous breakdown. I was more depressed after what happened to Tuck and Ashley than I had been any time after Ashley left me. One person was dead while another was hospitalized, and it was all my fault. Nobody blamed me for either of these tragedies. After all, Ashley and I had split for the second time, so as far as everyone was concerned, I had done the right thing. However, I know that I should have just found the courage when Ashley first left me and moved on. A little over a month after Tuck's death, I was sitting in my easy chair, feeling deeply depressed, when there was a knock at the front door. When I opened it, I was relieved to see who was there. It was Leandra. I took her in my arms and kissed her warmly. I led her to the couch where we sat and talked. It was very clear that she was thrilled to see me, but then a look of concern crossed her face. "Is your wife here?" she asked. "I'm not married," I told her, shaking my head. I watched her eyes light up, and she snuggled close to me. Then she pulled out a three-dimensional hologram of a baby and told me it was our son. He looks a lot like you did when you were a baby, except that he has pointed ears, she said. Leandra was also thrilled because he was tested and found to be fertile. She named him D after her grandfather, so you have a half-brother now on a different world. After a while, I told her what had happened. I made a mess of things. I think I was more than half crazy. I didn't follow your advice. I increased the percentage to 98, even though I knew there might be side effects. I wanted Ashley all to myself and didn't want her to even think about anyone else. I didn't consider the potential adverse effects on Ashley. I remembered you said they weren't that bad. In any event, there doesn't appear to have been any ill effects on Ashley from the higher percentage. However, a funny thing happened. As Ashley fell more in love with me, I began to fall out of love with her. I guess I began to see that it was just my ego that kept me from letting go. A guilty and concerned look crossed Leandra's face. Let me check you, she said as she took my hand and opened the screen on her device. Then a broad smile filled her face. Leandra hugged me tight and kissed me once again. I'm sorry, she said. Why are you sorry? I asked. I wasn't completely honest with you before I left. I didn't tell you that at 89% your wife would have loved only you. Also, I didn't tell you that I had altered the settings so as your ex-wife's love for you increased, your love for her would decrease. Remember, I couldn't venture into the 90% range unless you were willing. Well, you took the percentage there yourself. I was stunned by this information and stared at Leandra for quite a long moment as I tried to digest it. My stare must have lasted longer and been sterner than I thought. Leandra became quite frightened. Are you terribly angry with me? No, I'm not angry at all, I said, shaking my head. I'm just trying to get my head around what's happened. One thing that has come out of all this is that I was finally able to see Ashley for who she really was. What I saw was a person who wasn't very nice. Even so, I feel terribly guilty about what I've done to her. Is there anything you can do to correct this? Maybe you could reverse the chemicals so she doesn't love me anymore. Leandra shook her head. No, unfortunately, I can't. You can only alter a person's chemical composition once. Aside from the dangers of venturing above the 90% level, if I were to attempt to change her, it would probably drive her insane. I made dinner for Leandra and myself before we went to bed. We spent a lot of time together that night, and Leandra was ready to go again except that I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up feeling better than I had in a month. I still had an intense sense of guilt, but I knew that was something I was going to have to live with. As I was making breakfast, I teased Leandra. Have I put another baby in you? She smiled and nodded. This time it's a female. I chuckled and shook my head. These women certainly were fertile. Leandra told me about the results of her last mission. Out of the 24 women that had come to Earth, 14 returned pregnant, and 6 of them brought the men with them. Once again, Leandra asked me if I would return to her world with her. This time I said yes. So when you read this, I will have been on TIA for 7 years. After agreeing, I suddenly wondered how I would make a living in a strange new world. Leandra laughed and said that people on her planet worked because they wanted to, not because they had to. Besides, since I was a fertile male, the government would provide anything I felt I needed. Also, since Leandra will have produced 2 children from her missions and brought back her mate, she will be exempted from ever having to venture out again. Leandra did not tell me how many children she wanted to have, but she did tell me that she absolutely refuses to share me. That's fine with me because Leandra is more than enough woman for me. Jake, this is the story of my disappearance. I know it is hard to believe. If it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't believe it either. If the writing in this story seems a little strange, it's because I didn't type it. The fans have a machine that searches your mind and prints out the story you want to tell. It's not how I would have written it, but I think it has recorded the facts quite accurately. The other large envelope in the safe deposit box contains my last will and testament. You will receive the majority of my estate, including the ranch. Of course, you'll have to work with my brothers and sisters, but I don't think that will be a problem. Also, I have set up a trust to take care of your sister and another for your mother. I have 2 additional requests for you, and I beg you to please fulfill them for me. First, I want you to reach out to your sister and establish a better relationship with her. She chose to go with your mother, but I believe she regretted that decision. I cut her out of my life for what I perceived as her betrayal, and that was a mistake. I should have re-established a relationship with her long ago, but my pride kept me from doing so. My second request is going to be even harder for you, but I beg you with all my heart to do this for me. Please reach out to your mother and make her a part of your life. Please tell her that I truly loved her but that I've left this earth. I know you were very angry with her because she left us to go with Tuck, but I destroyed her life. She doesn't deserve to suffer any more than she already has. Please let her be part of your family. I beg you to let her know her grandchildren, and I hope there are some. I've never asked anything of you, but I'm pleading with you to do this for me. There was a handwritten message at the bottom of the last page. Jake, I have to go now. Leandra has created a pod that will carry both of us, and we have to head for the dimensional hole before it closes. Jake, I just want you to know that I have loved you from before you were born. You have done nothing but make me proud. I'm sorry for what I have done. I wish I could change it, but I don't have the power to do so. You can help right my wrongs, but whether you do or not, I will love you until the day I die. Please kiss your wife and any grandchildren you might have for me. All my love, Dad. I sat back in my chair and looked around the little room. Then I pulled out my father's last will and testament. It was as he said. I had control of most everything. There were still my aunts and uncles who would have a say, but they had always been pleased with me running the businesses, especially the ranch. Looking further, I discovered that my father had purchased life insurance to cover any estate taxes, so everything would come through free and clear of estate taxes. The 2 trusts were for $2 million each, so my ex-mother and sister would be well set. As to my father's requests, I would have to consider them carefully. I was only sure that I could do one of them. I felt there was nothing that I had to forgive my father for. Still, I would talk to my wife about the other 2. But first things first, I had to get this will over to the attorney's office. It was Christmas time, and I was standing at the exit leading out from one of the concourses. I was wearing a cheesy chauffeur's hat and holding up a small sign that read Tanya Weaver and Family. Clutching my arm was my mother, Ashley. It had taken me 2 months to finally make up my mind, but with Jenny's constant urging, I reached out to my mother and sister. When I called my mother and asked if she would like to go to dinner with us, she cried for a full 5 minutes before saying yes. Dinner was actually quite pleasant. I had Jenny and the boys with me, Mike, Tommy, and Billy. My mom was so nervous about meeting my family, but she got off to a great start with the boys by bringing a present for each, 3 of the latest video games. Jenny treated my mom like they were long-lost friends. At dinner, I did as my father requested and told her that he truly loved her but that I had passed from this world. My mother put her head down and sobbed softly for a few moments. Then she looked at me and asked if my father had really said that he loved her. I said that he did. She cried some more, but I could see that it had given her some peace. After that dinner, we began inviting her over to the house more and more. We even took a week-long vacation and left Mom to mind the boys. I was surprised, but she seemed to have had a great time, and the kids loved having her much more than the regular babysitter. My conversation with my sister was very strained at first. Tanya was very suspicious of why I wanted to get together with her after all these years. She told me that Dad and I hated her for taking Mom's side, which explained her coolness over the years. I assured her that was never the case and told her that Father's will had been found. This seemed to make her even more suspicious. I told her that I would send her a copy of it, and once she'd read it, she could talk to the attorneys all she wanted. After that, I called her again and, if she wanted, we could get together to discuss it. I didn't have to call her because she called me. She wanted to know more about the trust. I told my sister that this was something we should discuss face to face. I suggested that I fly back east and we meet. She agreed. Tanya was thrilled to see me, which pleased me considerably more than I ever thought. She hugged me tightly when I came through the door and introduced her husband Sid and their 3 kids, Todd, Chad, and Linda. They live in North Conway, New Hampshire, so I had flown into Portland, Maine, and drove over to their house. It was a 4-bedroom house with 3 baths up on a hill. It was lovely. Her husband Sid, who worked for a local bank, seemed like a really nice guy. Their 3 kids, ages 10, 8, and 7, were very polite. I asked my sister if she could give lessons in manners to my kids. I thought Tanya's kids would get along great with mine, as they were close in age, 9, 8, and 7. The visit was a great success. When I explained to my sister that the trust was a generation-skipping trust, I think she was glad that I had come to sort it out for her. She seemed confused and a little embarrassed because they didn't have the money to hire their own attorney, so I explained it as simply as I could. She could use the income from the trust for her lifetime. When she died, the trust would go to her kids. Tanya was thrilled with that. When I was getting ready to leave, I asked my sister if she and her family had plans for the Christmas holidays. She said they were just going to stay home. On a whim, I invited them out to the ranch. At first, she said they couldn't afford it. Then I pointed out that she had the income from the trust. Tanya looked at her husband Sid, who was nodding his head vigorously. When Tanya's kids found out they were going to a ranch for Christmas, they were very excited. So now I'm standing in the airport with my mother, who I might have ignored for the rest of her life if not for my dad, and I'm waiting for my sister, whom I had ignored for almost a decade. I don't know where you are, Dad, but thank you for pulling our family back together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.